Apple has been hard at work to completely revamp the entire iPhone lineup, and I have been hard at work to give you your first realistic look at your next iPhone. I've got models, renders, 3D prints, everything. So this video is going to be your best look yet at what you can expect from Apple in September. Although I shouldn't really say September, since for the first time in years, September might not actually be iPhone month for everyone. Multiple sources now are confirming a split launch for the 18 series. So all of the cool, expensive stuff is coming this September, but all of the base models are getting pushed to spring of 2027. So if you're a boring person who's planning on buying a boring phone, I'm so sorry, you're gonna have to wait an extra 6 months. But we want the fun stuff. So let's talk about the not boring iPhones that are coming this September. Starting with the 18 Pro. Okay, yeah, it does look the exact same as a 17 Pro. It's one of those years, but trust me, there's actually a lot of really interesting changes going on underneath. The first major change we can all be excited about is that the dynamic island is finally getting smaller. We know this because of a camera leak that came out that was completely misinterpreted for a bit, where everyone thought we were getting a hole punch on the top left, but the good news is that is not happening at all, and it's just Apple relocating an under display component of Face ID so that they can shrink the overall size of the island. The dynamic island should be getting around 35% smaller, which is pretty cool because it means when you have music or media or something playing in the island, it'll expand to be the current size of the island. And speaking of the display, the 18 Pro should be the first iPhone to get an LTPO Plus display, which is next generation display tech that should improve brightness as well as power consumption. But let's talk about the camera, because this is arguably where the biggest changes of the 18 Pro will be happening. Apparently, Samsung is developing a 3-layer stacked image sensor for the 18 Pro specifically that should result in better responsiveness, less noise, and better dynamic range. But that's not even the coolest part of the new camera system, because Apple's been working on a variable aperture camera for the main lens. This is a feature taken directly from Pro cameras, and it basically lets you control how much background blur or bokeh is in your shot. I don't know personally how many times I've used the iPhone camera and been like, I wish there was less blur in this photo or video, but this is definitely a cool feature that pushes the iPhone closer to Pro camera territory. And speaking of really cool but slightly unnecessary features, the A20 Pro chip this year is going to be ridiculous. It's going to be using a new 2nm architecture by TSMC plus new memory architecture. So it's going to be 15% more powerful and 30% more power efficient, which actually that's not unnecessary at all. I'll take the power efficiency. So those are the fun upgrades, but there's also a few weird ones. First of all, they're simplifying the camera control button to get rid of the swipe gesture. So now it's just a press and half press, I guess. Honestly, I don't care at all. I hate the camera control button. I disabled it, I don't use it. So I could not care in the slightest, but if you use the camera control button a lot for swiping, I'm sorry. There's also some rumored colors of coffee, burgundy, and purple. I do like the purple quite a bit, but there's also still no black option on the 18 Pro, which is crazy because that's their best-selling color. All right, so a new leak came out while I was working on this video that Apple's also testing a brighter red and blue color now. So I can't redo all of the renders I've already done, unfortunately, but I'm just including some red and blue renders of the Pro models throughout this video. So if you're wondering why there's a bunch of different colors now, that is why. Okay, back to it. Whatever color you go with though, the back glass is said to match the frame color better, so it's more of a uniform color than a split tone type thing. Plus the back glass is said to be a little transparent, which is one of those things that is just gonna sound really weird until Apple demos it in September, and I'm sure it's gonna look sick. But okay, this is my favorite leak of the video. The 18 Pro models are getting the C2 data chip with, you know, all the millimeter wave 5G, stuff like that. But there is also this leak that Apple could be debuting satellite 5G this year. If I can connect to satellites from my iPhone with 5G, just take all of my money. Just take all of my money immediately. But okay, last thing on the Pros, the Pro Max is apparently getting a little thicker and a little heavier, as if it wasn't thick and heavy enough already. But that's it. That's all we know about the Pro Max specifically versus the Pro. Now, the Pro models are cool and all, but they are not going to be the main announcement this September. As I'm sure you've seen online, Apple's been working on a foldy iPhone for quite some time now. We've got some leaks and rumors, and there's been some renders and schematics floating around, but what really caught my attention was this video. Let me explain why. Anyone can 3D print a plastic iPhone model, as I've done right here, but the thing that really stood out to me about this video specifically are two things. First of all, the model that they're using appears to be aluminum and not my cheap 3D printer resin plastic, which means it's already infinitely more expensive for them to make. And secondly, there appears to be a custom phone case on the model. model, 2 custom cases actually. Now here's the thing, making a custom injection mold for a phone case costs tens of thousands, if not $100,000+ per case design. So my question is, who would be willing to spend all of that money if they weren't 100% sure that that is the exact shape that they would need to be selling phone cases for in a few months? Usually outside of Apple's direct supply chain, case companies are actually the first in the world to get their hands on the new iPhone designs. There's this entire shady business of passing around these iPhone CADs before release so that these case companies can get a head start on designing their cases and have them ready to sell the second the new iPhone comes out. So this video is completely believable to me, but it's still kind of hard to see the phone itself under the case. So I took every angle I could from the video and I made a 3D model, which I think gives us a pretty good look at the device. But while I was making this model, something stood out to me, which was this specific pattern on the camera bump. Apple's been big on upping the mic quality of the Pro iPhones lately, so it's probably just an array of microphones, but it's also kind of familiar, huh? The only other Apple product that I know of that has this specific pattern is the Apple Watch Ultra. So I am taking this as confirmation that this isn't going to be the iPhone Fold like every publication's been calling it. This is going to be the iPhone Ultra. The other thing I noticed though working on this model was just how perfect the aspect ratio is. It really is basically just an iPad mini when you open it up, which is perfect because it immediately solves the content problem on foldables. You know how when you open up a Galaxy Fold or a Pixel, you just immediately get these massive black bars around everything? YouTube looks like trash, TikTok looks like trash, Instagram looks like trash. It's because a square is the least optimized aspect ratio for any sort of content, which is the problem every other foldable has, but not this thing. Plus, of course, it makes it easy for iPhone apps to run in their iPadOS aspect ratios without the developers having to completely redo everything. The only real question for me now is how this is actually gonna work. When I unfold my iPhone Ultra, am I just gonna enter iPadOS, or is iOS going to gain split screen and multitasking for the inside of the iPhone Ultra? There's also some apps like the Adobe Suite where there's functionally different versions of apps for the front of the iPhone Ultra and iPadOS where there's a larger aspect ratio. So am I gonna have to choose which version of which app I download for which screen? I don't know. It's all very messy. I'm sure Apple's figured this out in some very neat, clean way, probably. All I know is that this thing is super cool to hold. It's just so refreshing to be able to reach the top of my phone. I haven't been able to reach the top of my phone one-handed in like 10 years. So that's pretty cool. And then unfolded, it's like this little mini iPad. It's an iPad mini. It just feels like a slab of iPadOS because of how ridiculously thin that is. I mean, look at that, it's crazy. But that's just the physical body of the device. What else do we know about it? Well, we know that Samsung is going to be making the screen using a technology called ultra thin glass. This is supposedly gonna help the plasticky, rubbery feel on the inside screen like most foldables have. But it is worth noting that Samsung already produces a few foldable screens that are using ultra thin glass, and they still kind of have that plastic bag look. So I'm not super hopeful that this is gonna help. But what I am hopeful about is that this foldable is going to have basically zero crease. We already know that the screen is going to be made by Samsung, and at CES, Samsung showed a prototype of a foldable with no crease. So even if the end result isn't literally creaseless, I trust that Apple would not make a foldable before they've figured out how to at least make it almost invisible. We also know that unfolded, this thing is going to be between 4.5 and 4.8 millimeters thick, which is a little thinner than the iPhone Air, thinner than the Pixel Fold, and a little thicker than the Galaxy Z Fold. So either way, this thing is insanely thin. The cover display is going to be 5.3 inches and the inside display is going to be 7.6 inches. We also know that the casing is going to be a combination of aluminum and titanium, which is kind of the best of both worlds. Aluminum is great with thermals and heat dissipation, so it doesn't get super hot and thermal throttle, and titanium is way tougher and looks a lot better. There's been different leaks and rumors on the battery, but we know it's gonna land somewhere between 5,400 milliamp hours and 5,800 milliamp hours, which is honestly incredibly impressive for a thing that folds in half. There's also one thing that I got wrong in my renders, which is I added dual Face ID on the inner display and the front display, which there's kind of no way that happens. This is way too thin to add a Face ID module. Even the iPhone Air uses the camera plateau to create the extra space necessary for the Face ID module, and this doesn't have that on both sides. So what Apple's actually doing is adding a Touch ID button, which can be accessed folded or unfolded. I thought I would care a lot more about Touch ID being there, but It's honestly positioned so well that I don't even mind. But that's the thing, now that they're going with Touch ID, we genuinely have no idea what happens to the island. I mean, they spent so many years positioning it as this premium feature, and now they're making a new phone without Face ID at all. So where does the island go? Does it go in a little punch hole cut out in the corner? Do they recreate the dynamic island with nothing inside of it just to match the software experience? Like what? There's no clear answer here, which is why in my renders and 3D prints, you've kind of seen different things, because I genuinely have no idea what they're gonna do about this. So the part you've been waiting for, how much is this going to cost? Well, there's been different leaks and different rumors. No one price that's been leaked, but we've seen leaks from $1,800 to $2,500, which that's tough. That's a lot. That's a lot of money. So that's the Pro and the Ultra, but there is one more iPhone that Apple could announce this September, and that is the second generation iPhone Air. Now, according to leaks, Apple's been experimenting with this idea of adding a second camera to it, which would make sense so that it doesn't have a worse camera system than a phone that costs $200 less than it. The problem though is that apparently sales of the iPhone Air have been so abysmal already that Apple thinks another camera might not even be able to save it. So the iPhone 18 Air could come out in September with the rest of the high-end iPhone lineup, or it could come out a few months after that, or a few years after that, or maybe never at all. We don't really know. But there is one little thing that gives me a bit of hope. We already kind of know that the iPhone Air is a parts sharing product. Apple spent a ton of time miniaturizing all of the parts of the iPhone, and then with all those super thin parts lying around, they were like, I guess we could make an iPhone Air. But this could happen again. With the iPhone Ultra, they're gonna have to develop a super thin main and ultra wide camera, which would theoretically be the same exact camera system that the second generation iPhone Air used. So if there's already a bunch of parts going back and forth between the Ultra and the Air, it feels pretty easy for them to just take the super small camera system from the Ultra, take the smaller dynamic island from maybe the 18 Pro, and just stuff it into a next generation iPhone Air. Basically, all I'm trying to say is that even though the leaks and rumors have no idea if or when the new iPhone Air would come out, I personally would not be shocked if it did end up coming out in September, with the upgrades basically just being whatever they develop for the iPhone Ultra. So we've got the Pro models, the Ultra, and maybe the iPhone Air coming in September, but what about the base models coming early next year? Well, that's the weird thing, because we know surprisingly little about these base models. The only things we know right now about the iPhone 18 and iPhone 18e are actually updates that have leaked for the entire iPhone lineup, including the Pro and Ultra. So we know that all iPhone 18 models are going to get 12 gigabytes of RAM, probably related to the fact that Apple Intelligence is finally becoming real this year. Probably. We also know that all the 18s are going to get 24 megapixel front-facing cameras. Plus, all the models should get Apple's new C2 chip for millimeter wave 5G at a much better power consumption level. We also know that every model is getting a much brighter display. We don't know by how much, but apparently it's a big focus for them, so outdoor viewing should be a lot better. And yeah, that's all we know right now about the 18 and 18e. But I find that really interesting, that the only things we know right now are things that they would have already announced for the rest of the iPhone lineup by the time these come out. It really kind of seems like by the time these base models come out in 2027, Apple will have nothing left to talk about that they haven't already announced on the Pro models in September, which is why I don't think we're getting the full picture on these base models right now. If they're gonna delay these base models by 6 months, make people wait, and then do a whole separate event, I really cannot see them only announcing features that came out on the Pro models 6 months ago. So I feel like there's gotta be some sort of surprise feature on these base models that we won't be expecting, or they'll be bundled into a much bigger event with iPads and MacBooks and stuff like that. Overall, it's definitely a solid lineup, but unless you have $2,000 just stashed away for the iPhone Ultra, this feels like more of an incremental upgrade year until they do the crazy 20th anniversary edition iPhone later in 2027. Unless the satellite 5G thing is real, in which case, just take all my money, just take all of it.